To the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, great speech.
Yeah. I call the honourable member Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take a call on this and continue talking about, one, why it is that Labor does support this bill, but some of the concerns that we do have it. It's a bill that introduces two key changes to the student loan scheme, and the first of these, around the definition of income, is something that we are very supportive of, because what this bill does is it broadens out the definition of what income is from just wages to include trusts and companies and superannuation schemes. So we're very happy about this, and what we're seeing is we're hoping it's the start of a road to Damascus for members opposite, where they will start to see that maybe we do need to tax things other than just wages and salaries in this country and recognise that. We see it as the beginning of the dawning of a new era for the government members opposite, that maybe they'll see that a capital gains tax would be something that would be preferable too, because much of the logic that they've applied in this bill would equally apply to them thinking about income and the way that we treat that for other matters of revenue. So that's something we'd like over the Easter break for members opposite to pause and think about as they sit down to their hot cross buns and their Easter eggs. But Labor does find this in a particularly appealing change within this legislation because we think that it's fair. We think that it's fair that people who are earning income from other than wages and salaries do make their student loan repayments, and it's not just the plumber that goes out after he or she finishes her apprenticeship and starts her job that makes payments through their wages, that you also have people that receive income from family trusts, for example, is also making payments back into their student loan obligation. The other thing that this bill does, of course, is enable the information sharing, the data matching at the border. And this is all around the issue of tightening up at the border and wanting to make sure that people that have taken out loans who are now living overseas, that they are making their contribution back into the scheme. I think that the previous member who spoke just thought he could score some cheap points around that point, but this is something that I would like to get Labor's concern on record about, because actually if we are going to talk about data and information matching and how it is that a government's responsibilities towards the security of that data, I don't think members opposite should really be making jokes and scoring cheap points around that. Just today we've seen the EQC in Christchurch with yet another security breach in terms of people's data that they hold. This time they've released bank account details and names of claimants into that schemes. What we've had, the point, Mr Bridges, is that you are a government that is not to be trusted with people's data. You've shown this in ACC. IRD, the very agency that is being empowered under this piece of legislation, has previously shown that it doesn't have all the measures in place to protect data. So we on this side of the House are asking this government to give some assurances that when they are dealing with individuals' private information, that they do have the necessary measures in place to ensure the security of that information. And that is actually not too much to ask, Mr Speaker. I think it's what we all expect when we, as citizens of this country, empower the state to have a whole lot of information about us. We do expect some levels of security around that, and it's certainly something that we in Labor think should be a priority for any government, and we invite this government to dwell on that fact. What we do is that we see this legislation as pretty much benign legislation. It's doing some things that are good, but we do have concerns. And one of my primary concerns as the spokesperson for tertiary education is this is yet more tinkering around the edges on the issue of student support. That what we are not seeing is any comprehensive examination of how it is that we want or expect or acknowledge that our young people, or anybody in this country actually, that enters into training or tertiary education is going to support themselves through this year. And what we have is a government opposite that wants to dampen down demand in the area of tertiary education. This is something that the Minister of Tertiary Education, Stephen Joyce, has made very clear. And there have been a number of policy initiatives over the course of them being in government that certainly demonstrates that they do want to dampen down. What we've seen, part of this dampening down, is there are now 25,000 fewer people that have access to the student loan because of the initiatives of Budget 2010 and 2011. 800 people lost their access to student loan because of retrospective measures that were put in place, things that they couldn't even acknowledge were going to happen before the legislation was put in place following those budgets. So Labor would rather see, rather than these tinkering around the edges type pieces of legislation that we're seeing from this government, and I'd like to note this is the second in 2 years, we'd like to see a comprehensive review of how it is we manage the very complicated issue of supporting our students through their study. And for Labor, that is a priority, because we see training and people gaining skills and people gaining education is absolutely vital to our future. It is certainly not something we want to dampen down, because on this side of the House that we believe that education and training are absolutely vital. We're not just about the rhetoric of an innovation-led economy. We're about doing the things that you need to do in order to have an innovation-led economy, and supporting tertiary students and making sure that the necessary mechanisms for student support are in place is very much a part of making sure that those places are in place. But what we've seen from this government over the half a decade, the 5 long years that they've been in government, is that they've stopped people aged over 55 from accessing the student loan scheme. And they did this in the 2011 budget. So what this means, when you put this together with a period in our history when we are experiencing very high unemployment that the government's not doing much to address, not only are these people not going to be able to find jobs, but they've also cut off, for those aged over 55, for many of them, their access to go back and to retrain. Because the reality is, for many working people, they still have quite a long working life ahead of them from the age of 55 onwards. But this government hasn't put in place the student support in order to ensure that that can happen. And the bill that they're introducing in the House today does nothing to address this issue of student support. We've seen, of course, one of the most alarming issues around student support for us, and the one that makes absolutely no logical sense, is the removal of allowances for people studying at postgraduate level. If you really do want an economy and a future and a country and a society that is based on innovation, why would you stop people doing postgraduate study? This is the very thing that drives innovation. If you look at any of the countries around the world that excel in the area of innovation, it has very high levels of masters and PhD students and graduates. And this is something this government doesn't believe in, and they have stopped access to that level of training. That just for us is just an absolute... we can't understand any of the logic behind that and why it is that you do that. So, Mr. Speaker, what we're seeing here is a piece of legislation that does tinker around the edges, and as my colleague, Dr. David Clark, talked about, that actually it is a bill that is a bit of an embarrassment to this government, because it's coming back and playing fix-up. Not only is it coming back and playing fix-up, but it's tried to play fix-up in areas where the department that has to do this, the Inland Revenue, lacks the capacity to do it. So that if we have a look at the officials' report to the FEC committee on submissions on the bill, what they spelt out to members of the committee is that the bill includes a number of amendments needed to ensure the delivery of the remaining core policy changes enacted in the Student Loan Scheme Act of 2011. But then it goes on to say that it isn't able to do this because the new loan management system proved to be more complicated than expected, i.e. they didn't get it implemented. And because of the complexity of the student loan system, the detailed analysis identified that the system's design, development and testing required to implement some of the 1 April 2013 changes is significantly greater than originally expected. To ensure timely delivery of the core government policies contained in the 2011 Act and the policies that would have the greatest benefit to borrowers, it's proposed to not proceed with some of the measures in the 2011 Act. So I guess the best thing you can say is at least we didn't have another NovaPay with a system that wasn't ready to go. But this, Mr Speaker, is a piece of legislation that does not systemically address a lot of the issues that we need to around the very complicated issue of student support. We do support the measures that it's taking to redefine income for the purposes of student loan repayment, but we do have some cautions against the information sharing and how it is the government is going to manage this. We'd like to see the government do more in the area of student support and not just this tinkering, Mr Speaker.
I call the honourable member